have actually been playing Saints Row 2 on the PC, right?
Correct, and unfortunately on the PC, I haven't been hit with as many problems as some people have. It's pretty much unplayable for some people out there. I am able to play it. The two major issues are, and one of them is much worse than the other, and that is when I'm driving around, the game apparently somehow managed to not get Windows to prefetch its content off the hard drive. So that means as you're driving along, the game stops completely to load. But of course, because there's some latency, it doesn't just freeze like it's crashed. It stops. Then a couple of seconds later, you've moved a bit and you're suddenly going at full pelt. So you might be driving along, suddenly the game freezes and you've crashed into a wall or something along those lines. I'm not that far into the game, so thankfully it hasn't been much of an issue in any of the missions. I've only been involved in a couple of car chases and I managed to just pull them off. Is there a time limit? Because I've noticed on the HUD, on the left, on the map or whatever it is, there's a bar that often goes down. Is that a time limit?
Which one? This is on the side missions, like the drug running ones?
On the main missions. In one of the missions,
no.
I ended up having to chase someone, and as I was driving along, there was a bar that was slowly decreasing.
That's probably the spy, like you're tailing someone, and that's going to be they're detecting you or not.
No, because I was shooting at them. Maybe it was the car's health or something.
Yeah, it's going to be your car's health or their car's health.
Okay, yeah, because I was looking at that and thinking, oh shit, I can barely shoot these people because of the lag spikes and the slowdown. But if that was their health, apparently it was the opposite.
Yeah. No.
Yeah. And as I said, the other issue is the slowdown. Now, most of the time the game runs at well above 60 frames per second, even if a lot of shit is happening. So it's not as if it's because my computer cannot run the game. It is incredibly smooth when something isn't going wrong. And it should be incredibly smooth. But every now and then, for no discernible reason, even if nothing is happening, the game will drop down to like 10 frames per second and become a complete slideshow that is just incredibly annoying. And sometimes this does in fact happen when stuff is happening, so that you basically cannot shoot people or avoid police cars or anything of that sort. So it is a really, really crap port. And possibly the stupidest thing is the controls. And the game is playable with a 360 controller, and I've got my PlayStation 3 controller pretending to be a 360 controller, so it's not as if this is because I'm trying to play the game with some random controller. And I assume these aren't the controls on the consoles, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. When driving, the left trigger is the handbrake.
Yeah, they have two, on the console version, you have your choice between two different controller styles. So you can use the right trigger to drive, left trigger to brake, not hand brake. Hand brake is mapped to the face buttons. Or you can go with the GTA default, which is using, I think, X to accelerate, A to brake, and then I forget which one is handbrake. But
so that is actually in the console.
Yeah, you do have the two different choices between the traditional Dreamcast mode, or the traditional GTA mode, where you use the face buttons.
That is mind-blowing. But you got the option to change it.
Yeah.
Guess what? You can't change any of the console controls in any way, shape, or form on PC. You're stuck with that default. You can edit the buttons, but they don't affect the controller. So you're fucked. And guess what else they do? Even if you're using the officially recognized 360 controller, the game still maps the keyboard controls on the screen. So in the tutorial, as it's telling you how to do something, it has the key up on the screen and tells you to press the keyboard key.
Can you at least, in some games, even though you're using a controller, you can still press down on the keyboard and use those controls as well?
I haven't tested that. Yeah. Presumably you could though. But that it's just so incredibly lazy and just ridiculous. I mean, if you were to have all that sort of stuff, that's just laziness. But if you're then going to have that as well as completely unacceptable technical stuff, that is just completely ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's
just,
there are people that say that this is like the worst port ever. And Volition.
I don't think I would go that far, because the fact that I can actually, I've played for like maybe 4 hours or something. It hasn't crashed once during that time, and I know other people do have issues with crashing, but there are ports that do not work full stop. I wouldn't say it's the worst port of all time, and do not work for anyone with the game whatsoever.
Yeah, I know that Volition didn't actually do the PC version as well. They had someone else go out and do it.
It was outsourced.
Yeah. Do you know who did it, or?
I've forgotten.
Yeah.
I've forgotten.
So it's no one notable, but
it could have been, because notable people often make terrible ports. Like People Can Fly did the terrible Gears of War port. So porting often gets stuffed up by high-profile people.
So, I know for the third one, they were very clear that they themselves were handling the PC version of it, which is a pretty embarrassing situation. And obviously there was no money in going back and fixing Saints Row 2.
Of course.
Now, obviously, I don't know why you're struggling along with the PC version when you could probably go to any GameStop and buy like a used version of Saints Row 2 for the PlayStation 3 for like $10 or $6 these days, right?
But then I'd have to pay $10 for it.
Yeah.
So I think the answer is right there, that I would have to pay for it.
You get what you pay for, man.
Yeah, well, that's true. But I mean, it's ridiculous. It's certainly not the worst port of all time, but it is one of the worst.
Is there any silver lining to this cloud?
Well, not to the porting, there isn't.
No, can you get to the? Can you see through this horrible thing?
Don't worry, I will be talking about the game as well.
Okay.
I will be talking about the game. Well, there might be a silver lining to the port. Did the game display natively at 1080p on consoles?
I have no idea, but it looked really good.
Okay, but you would assume not. I mean, hardly any games these days display natively at 1080p. So you could say the PC version has the advantage of being able to play at whatever fucking resolution you want and having it look amazing as far as sharpness is concerned.
Are the explosions any good, or are they slideshow?
As I said, there is no logical reason to the slowdown.
Right.
So chaos does not result in slowdown. Okay. There might be slowdown when chaos is happening, but it is not caused by that. So I've experienced quite a few explosions at 60 frames per second plus at 1080p. Well, technically not 1080p, but at the equivalent resolution.
One thing I do remember about the presentation on the console versions is they always had spectacular explosions.
Yeah. And the smoke effects are nice. They float there for a minute, then disappear. When you're doing the mayhem missions and you're blowing up huge amounts of trucks, it is very visually enjoyable.
Yeah.
And this is not at all what I was expecting, because from outside of the series, my impressions of the Saints Row series was that it was, even when it developed its own personality, not a particularly well-designed game in any facet, including even just the base mechanics, and that it simply relied on crazy situations and its humor 100%. That was my impression based on reviews, because the basic reviews could all be summarized as, well, it's a complete shit of a game compared to Grand Theft Auto, but it's so hilarious and crazy you won't care, right?
Yeah, I'd say so. That's what most people said, yeah.
Yeah, and that is not the case at all. I mean, compared to Grand Theft Auto, the mechanics themselves, the shooting mechanics, are vastly superior to Grand Theft Auto 4, I would say. They're more simple. Basically, if you're using an Uzi or any other sort of gun, they all pretty much feel the same, but the controls are much easier to use and much more flowing. You don't have to fuck around with a cover system that is awkward and doesn't work. The driving mechanics are very much from the older PS2 style Grand Theft Auto, and I don't think they're any worse. The difference is, and here you could easily say it's worse than Grand Theft Auto, the difference is the difference between the cars feel much more similar than in Grand Theft Auto, and the archetypes are more limited as well, and the differences are less interesting. Like, the Jeeps in the game, they've just got a shitty turning circle and accelerate slowly, and that's the case with all the Jeeps, and there's no sort of different feel in the traction or anything like that. Like, when you're in a four-wheel drive in Grand Theft Auto, you've got a much better feel for traction because you're in a four-wheel drive, even if it's this really heavy thing. There's not that much detail to the driving engine here at all, even compared to the PS2 Grand Theft Autos. So there, it's definitely inferior to Grand Theft Auto. But as far as the shooting is concerned, I would put it well above Grand Theft Auto 4 because it works a lot better. And it might be less complex than Grand Theft Auto 4, but it's better at what it does because Grand Theft Auto 4 was complex, but had some really major flaws in what it was attempting to do.
Well, number one is it wasn't fun.
Exactly.
I think that the driving and shooting in this game is first and foremost fun, and that's what Volition has delivered in the subsequent sequels.
Absolutely,
there's just straight lining fun to you.
That's the thing. In Grand Theft Auto 4, it's not fun not because the weapon or the driving is not complex, but because they don't use it in an interesting way. So an AK-47 might be completely different to using an M16, but what the fuck does that matter with how the levels are designed?
Right.
It's completely meaningless.
Right. Yep. And also, the weapon wheel in Saints Row is much preferred as well. I know they've corrected that in Grand Theft Auto 5, but the freedom of having the weapon wheel and the variety of weapons is so much better.
Yeah, all you need to do is you just hit the button and press the direction on the analog stick, and it's so flowing. You can just switch weapons at ease with no problem in the heat of the battle, and you can select exactly what you want. It is the weapon switching is exceptionally well done. That's something that Grand Theft Auto 4 has always struggled with, and still did with 4.
And combining the two, I mean, shooting from the vehicles in this game was actually great in the first Saints Row as well. I cannot comment on that because it's slow down
due to the terrible driving. Yeah. So shooting is incredibly awkward.
You'll find in subsequent versions, should you play them, that the shooting from the vehicle, which was always difficult in Grand Theft Auto, is actually preferable in this one. You have full range control.
Yep. It's definitely on paper a better system. It's just in Grand Theft Auto, when the game doesn't work properly, if you just have to switch L2 and shoot in that direction, that's easier than having to fiddle with a cursor. But in normal circumstances, it is definitely a vastly superior system. And another thing I think that it actually does a lot better than Grand Theft Auto, and I assume this gets better and better as I go along, is the design of the main story's missions. So, as you're going along in Saints Row 2, there's a nice pacing to the mission. So you might have to go along, and you're just told you got to go and kill some drug dealers to steal their drugs for whatever purposes. So you do that. Then you've got to do something else, like you might have to go and then shoot someone attempting to escape in a car, and that sort of thing. And Grand Theft Auto does the same thing, but there's no fluency to it. Here, there's a nice flow to it, so you move from doing one objective to another with some degree of pacing to it in the Grand Theft Auto games, which is something that I've always thought was annoying. What it's felt like is, once you've completed one part of the missions, it's as if you've finished an entire mission. So you do the shooting part, and then you might have to get into a boat, and it's still the same mission, but it's a completely disconnected thing. And to the degree where in some missions it literally was disconnected. So you did a shootout, and then appearing before you after the shootout is the glowing circular thing that you then had to go in to start a mission. That's not the case here. You start the mission, and it might be a long, 20-minute affair or 15-minute affair where you're doing a whole range of things with a nice sense of pacing to it that is simply not there in the design of Grand Theft Auto. And they attempted to do this in Grand Theft Auto 4, but they were so verbose in their design that it just became boring and overwrought. Here, they really get the balance of you doing little things so that you're always achieving something really, really perfectly, which was lacking in GTA 4 when they attempted to follow the same sort of structure.
The freewheeling style, which is so much better in terms of the fluidity compared to the stolid nature of Grand Theft Auto, is really refreshing. I mean, freewheeling is probably the closest and best description I can apply to the missions, because it always feels like something's just sliding out of control. Oh shit, get back in the car, we've got to get on the freeway kind of.
Yeah, it's like it goes for the same thing that the original Mafia did, but in a less extreme manner,
right,
and a more sort of flowing manner, which is the point of it, because in Mafia, the point was to, jar you, that something happened that you'd expect. Here, the point is to throw something unexpected, but make it immediately accessible and enjoyable to then do this new thing.
It's a good time to mention that after the news in this show, we will be going over Mafia, and more specifically Mafia 2, a game I know.
Correct.
Well, I won't spoil anything.
Nope.
So, so beyond the missions, what else did you like or dislike about it?
Well, here's the thing, and I just cannot comprehend why they thought this was a good idea, because it goes against the entire design philosophy of everything in the fucking game. Why on earth do they force you to do activities to raise your reputation before you can do the missions?
Yeah. This is the worst thing any game can do. You're sailing along in the main mission, and then all of a sudden they're like, nah, you can't enter the last third act until you've leveled up this and leveled up that, and there's nothing more annoying. And
it destroys the flow of what you're doing, and it saps the fun out of both the activities and the missions, because you're going through the missions and you're enjoying it, but at the back of mind you're thinking, well, I can't actually continue on doing the next mission because my reputation has just reached 0.
Right.
So it's putting negative thoughts in your head as you're doing these awesome things. And it saps the fun out of the activities because it's forcing you to do them. And they're these really fun and ridiculous side activities. Like the Mayhem thing is just awesome, where the only objective is to blow as much stuff up with the best weapons in the game as you possibly can. But then if you're forced to do that to raise your reputation, you think, well, this isn't actually a fun thing to do unless I feel like doing it, right?
Right. Yeah.
Because they're side things. They're these random, ridiculous, limited, but fun things to do that you do when you feel like you want to do them. So if you're forced to do them, then they're not fun anymore, because you just want to go off and do a proper fucking mission where you've got, this whole narrative peak and pacing peak to what you're doing, but no, you can't. And you might want to blow shit up, but at the back of your mind is, well, it's also kind of a chore because the game wants me to do it.
It's kind of like if you took your favorite author and you just enjoy reading their book. I go, okay, well, here's your favorite book. I want you to read the first 2 chapters. I'll be back in 25 minutes, and then I'll be giving you a comprehension test on that. Right? It takes something that's a joy and turns it into a stressful chore. And the worst part about it is there are some mission types that I just was never good at, like the insurance fraud ones. And there are some missions that are just boring, like the pimping ones.
And it's not as if you can redo the easier missions to get the respect again, because they're in basically a series of 6 missions that you can do, and they get progressively harder and harder, and they get reasonably challenging. So this could end up being quite a problem given the fact that I am playing the game under these conditions. And changing the difficulty, I don't think affects... it just affects how much damage you take in the eyes. So, for example, if you want to do Mayhem, I got up to mission number 3, and it suddenly got pretty damn hard to make the amount of money in the time period. So I'm going to have to move on to something else until I can come back to that.
Yeah.
And it's just such a stupid thing. It's incomprehensible, because everything else about the game is going against that sort of thing.
And here's the thing. I got up against that, and I was like, okay, I really don't like doing side missions, so I raced through the main story, loved every second of it. There's only one side mission I like, which is the protecting the various drug runners, like the Mommy drug runner and the Rasta drug runner and all the rest of it. I love those missions. But I was like, okay, I need to raise my reputation. I'll go and take back all of the territories because I like territorial games as well, right?
So does that raise your reputation?
No.
Because how could you breeze through the story without doing the side activities?
No, you have to do one of each, and then they let you continue in the main story.
Yeah.
But there is a point where you get to the last third of the game, which it sounds like you're at, where they're like, no.
No, I'm early on.
Okay, well, you will probably avoid what I came up against, because I ended up having nothing more to do, taking all the territory, having done all the missions, and there was nothing left for me to do other than to do all the side missions.
Yep.
So now you'll be happy to know that this is the last time you'll deal with this in the Saints Row franchise.
Yep, I have heard that, and I could understand this being in the first game, right? But the fact that they carried this over to the second really just genuinely boggles the mind.
I think they're just trying to add length to the game.
Yep, that's the only thing I can think, because it's on How Long to Beat. It's listed as 18 hours, and if you're doing, let's say that each side mission takes, let's say 2 minutes. Now, there are, let's say, 40 missions in the game. If you're going to remove those 2 minutes, and they get harder, so let's say 5 minutes, right?
On average, yep.
Yep, so 5 minutes, if you remove 200 minutes of the game, that's 3.5 hours, you've only got a 15-hour game.
Yep.
And for an open world title, people are going to complain about that.
Particularly since this game came out, I think, after Grand Theft Auto 4. I don't know if it pipped it at the post or not. But one was definitely before 4. I don't know if this one was before or after. But yeah, you're not going to get away with that. This
was released at exactly the same time.
Okay, yeah. And, with Grand Theft Auto, you generally get 80 to 100 hours.
Yep.
So, yeah, that wasn't going to fly. That's the only reason I came up with, and there's nothing more I hate in gaming than boring padding.
Yeah. That to me is as disgraceful as the terrible pork job.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And just, I haven't really talked about the story, and this is another thing that surprised me, because I was expecting, once again, something that was hilarious, but also pretty stupid and, deliberately badly done. But the production values are actually, they're pretty damn good. I mean, the script is not necessarily incredibly witty, but it's well written and enjoyable. The humor is of course good, which I was expecting the humor to be good, so that was expected. But I wasn't expecting it to be good humor that was also well done, not just in terms of the joke, but in terms of the production value. And I think once again, Grand Theft Auto is to blame here, because Grand Theft Auto, everyone has to go on about how good the writing is in Grand Theft Auto, and the writing here is easily equal to the writing in Grand Theft Auto. It's a different style of writing, and it's not going to get praised as much, but I don't think you could seriously say that Grand Theft Auto has better writing than Saints Row. And I'm referring, of course, to the script and the characters, but if you look at the characters in Grand Theft Auto, except when they're doing some extreme pastiche, it's not as if they're good characters, is it? Let's be honest.
Well, but this is the thing. The characters in Grand Theft Auto 4 and Vice City and San Andreas aren't they're ridiculous stereotypes. Even in Grand Theft Auto 4.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I know. I'm agreeing with you. Even in Grand Theft Auto 4, which was the closest thing they had to a Scorsese film, it was basically a Scorsese film if Joe Pesci played every role. It was fucking ridiculous. I'm an Irishman, I drink a lot, or I'm an Italian, I kill people, what do you want? I'm a woman, I'm a slut, Actually, that sounds more like Ted Bundy, but Al Bundy. Hooters.
Oh, there, bit of a mistake.
Yeah, a little bit. But in any case, no. I mean, the characters are not realistic, but they're more like people I used to know in the real world as opposed to the ridiculous cultural stereotypes found in Grand Theft Auto 4. I mean, they talk like normal people I used to know, except funnier.
Which is the point of Grand Theft Auto, of course. I'm not criticizing for that. The quality of the writing is, clearly deserves as much credit as Grand Theft Auto, I would say. Yeah. And just one thing I wanted to use an example, and I'm hoping there's more stuff like this as I go along, because I have heard that the humor beyond the side missions doesn't necessarily manifest itself within the gameplay as much as it might. And should, because gameplay is often inherently funny. You can do hilarious stuff with gameplay simply through stuff like physics. There are games, I mean, look at Surgeon Simulator. That is based on the one fucking physics joke, and I can watch that for hours on YouTube, and I could probably play that for hours as well, right? So there was one example that I came across, and this is right at the very beginning of the game, where you're getting your hideout. And to get your hideout, you've got to clear out a bunch of homeless people and destroy their shanties. So that's fine. That's a funny enough concept. But you can't just destroy the shanties. You can't, destroy them with baseball bats or shoot them. You've got to pick up the homeless people and throw them into the shanties to destroy them.
I'd forgotten about that. Yeah. It's great. And
that's awesome.
There is more and more
of that. Are there more
that.
moments like
yes,
that?
Yes, there are. Absolutely.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent.
It's what makes this game so much fun and so enjoyable. I think for the longest time, this was, to me, my favorite open world game ever. And of course,
what overtook it?
Oh, probably. I'm going to have to get back to you on that. I really have to get back to you on that. But
okay.
Probably Saints Row the Third.
Yep. And the only other thing that really stands out so far, bearing in mind I'm only several hours into the game, is the setting. Now, it's incredibly generic. This is a problem that Volition has in all their games. Like, Red Faction is set on Mars, but it might as well be in the middle of the fucking Earth or something. I mean, there's nothing particularly Mars-like about it, apart from the fact that the Earth is red. There's no feeling to the world whatsoever.
Technically, it's not the Earth.
Shut up. That's beside the point. But, and this is the case here as well. The city is basically American Genericana, but it goes beyond that. And here's the bizarre thing. I assume, and when I stop and look around the area, that the different parts in the city are meant to be different from one another. Like, there might be a poor area, and there's the university area that's got campuses and all that sort of thing. Unless I'm paying extreme attention to it, I could be in any part of the city at any given time.
Yeah, I mean, over time, you will get more environments will be opened up to you.
Yep.
I know that you can go anywhere from the start, but there's no reason for you to go there. But later on, there are distinct parts of the town that will start to differentiate themselves.
Well, I've been around a reasonable amount, maybe about you just driving around on a random street over here and there, not through the whole block, probably at least 2/3 of the map. And the only parts that feel different from one another is, say, the trailer park, because the ground is made of earth. And at that time it actually is earth,
not Mars,
as opposed to concrete.
Now, there's also a high-end suburb part of the town as well.
Yep.
Okay, so yeah, you've seen it all.
Yeah, I mean...
They need an environment designer, that's clear.
Yeah, exactly. There's no feeling to the world whatsoever. And to an incredible degree. I mean, even if I'm driving through the trailer park area, if I'm not really paying much attention, it still feels exactly the same as anywhere else. It's designed in exactly the same way.
Yeah, it is very, very generic. And there's nothing more to say about it than that. In Saints Row 3 and 4, it doesn't get any better, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
It gets tiring. They just need a better environmental designer. I mean, the levels are fine as much as they are, but in terms of like just the detail, and I don't know if that was because they're rushing stuff out, and it's not the most important part of the game to them, but it is an important part to any game, and they should have focused more on it.
Yeah. And the final thing I'll end on, and bear in mind, we will be reviewing possibly all 3 Saints Row titles, except for obviously the first one, as it's a 360 and no one likes 360 games. So keep tuned into the future. But the note I wanted to end on was just on the character creation again, which we actually end up... we did talk about that in detail in previous episodes, but I wanted to bring it back again. The fact that you can have a bearded woman with a transvestite Cockney accent, because it is a woman, so therefore they are a transvestite. A Cockney man's accent with a beard, wearing a Japanese-themed outfit that is actually baseball clothes, with her face based on the Asian woman from Mad TV, who is also an exceptional voice actor and plays a lot of parts on Family Guy, which also features Mila Kunis, who plays Shandae here, by the way.
Margaret Cho?
Small amount of trivia for you.
Margaret Cho? Is that who you're talking about?
I cannot remember her name.
Okay.
But I don't even know if she's on Mad TV anymore.
Yeah.
But she played this hilarious Asian character who was just one of the best parts of the show, easily. Anyway, the fact that you can have a character like that in the cutscenes, playing it completely 100% deadpan, is just fucking amazing.
Hang on, this is the people.
Okay.
Hello, this is Shane.
Hello, Shane. It's Emily here at Toll Priority.
Oh, yes, Emily.
How are you?
Good.
Good. Shane, with regards to your JB Hi-Fi delivery,
Mm-hmm.
have you received it yet?
No.
No. Now you're at Yarraman, correct? You're at the Caesar's End?
That's correct.
Okay. The last scanning that we had was that it was transferred out to the Yarraman driver.
Right, yeah, I see that on the web.
Okay. And I'm pretty certain that it's still with the driver. The depot is still trying to contact the driver, get in contact with the driver to confirm if it is out for delivery today.
Okay, yeah, it was
They've gotten back to us.
it was in the Caboolture depot, 2 days ago?
That's correct, on the 17th.
Okay. So the driver would have received it, yesterday, the 18th?
It was transferred out to the driver on the
17th.
afternoon.
Yeah, 3:48. Yeah.
Okay,
Okay, so no new info.
sorry?
So no new information.
No, yeah, exactly. As soon as the depot will advise further, we'll have someone call you again.
Okay, and is this package marked as signature required, or is it something the driver will be able to leave?
What is it that you're expecting?
Oh, I'm just wondering if the shipper specified that it's a signature required or not. Because I do have my I do have the property open, the front door's open, all the rest of it, so they should be able to come here. I just want to make sure if I miss them that it's okay for them to leave it.
I don't have it on my screen.
Okay.
The vendor has given us the authority to leave it. We're not usually allowed to leave JB Hi-Fi consignment.
Okay.
It depends on the value of the consignment. So is it expensive?
Oh, it's under $100.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't have the authority to leave it on my screen.
Okay. Very good. I'll make sure that everything's accessible then.
Okay, no problem.
All right. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks,
All right.
Shane.
Bye-bye. Yeah, they know nothing.
That wasn't very useful.
No, or entertaining. I was hoping we'd be able to use it.
Yeah.
I'll just put that into flight mode again.
You should have put on a voice, then we could have.
Oh, yeah, and make her go through it very painfully, right? I could put on a stutter, or a Russian accent, yeah.
I am inquiring about my baggage.
Yes. What do you mean? I come here, I buy game, JB Hi-Fi, they promise. So, well, that sucks. They know nothing.
Yeah.
They gave it to the driver on Monday afternoon, she said. You know what today is? Thursday afternoon.
Yeah.
I mean, how long? What I should really be concentrating on is how long does it take to beat the game, because that's when it will get delivered, after he's finished it.
Exactly.
I happen to believe that it got into their sort depot, and someone said, "Oi, what's this? JB Hi-Fi?" Because the sort depot is in this place in a city that's notorious for drug use.
Yep.
And I'd say they'd probably held up to the light and went Grand Theft Auto 5, yoink.
I hope they did, because if you want any game to be stolen, it's Grand Theft Auto 5.
I told you that when Grand Theft Auto 3 came out, I was slim on money.
Yep.
And I was like, you know what? The makers of this game would want me to shoplift it. And I gave it serious thought, but unfortunately there were no, copies. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I was like, no, if there is a game that should be shoplifted, this is the game.
It's Grand Theft Auto.
Because no one can complain about that. There's no moral ambiguity.
Exactly.
All right, so do you want to pick up where we left off?
Yep. I think it was up to you to say something. I finished the line about the transvestite Asian woman.
Okay, all right. I do find it curious that this is the third time now you've brought this up on the podcast. So, if there's anything you want to share with us, we could probably record something separately and play it at the end.
Well, I can tell you I'm already making plans to have a very slim Ethiopian male black transvestite in Saints Row the Third if I get around to playing it.
Oh, so, you've got to carry over your character.
But this is the thing, I mean, that's the whole, you are carrying over your character, it's the same character.
No, but what I'm saying, you've got to bring
just in a different form.
You've got to bring your character over to the next game. The same transvestite man, woman.
But then how can I get a thin Ethiopian transvestite into the game?
I guess you'll have to start over, yeah.
The radio is one of the best open world radios I've played, and one of the best licensed radios in a game I've played. And the reason for that is all the songs they've chosen, it's not that they're interesting or good songs from the genre that they're in, it's because they're perfect driving music. And I can listen to, the genres of music there that I have no interest in and enjoy driving around to the tunes because they complement the driving and the just setting of the game just so excellently. And it's kind of the antithesis of San Andreas' radio and Vice City's. To me, those radios were really often crap driving music, depending on, to lesser extent, Vice City, because basically everything from the 80s was good driving music, right?
Right.
But San Andreas had a lot of songs that were just boring to drive around to, but San Andreas' radio worked so well regardless because it was such a perfect selection of songs that gave a good and varied representation of the time period that it was pastiching. So that's not a criticism of San Andreas, but it's kind of the antithesis to San Andreas, where it doesn't go for any sort of selection to any purpose other than to be brilliant driving music. And it does that to perfection, except in the case of the classical radio. And
that I was actually going to say that.
Yeah, and it's just, what the fuck were they thinking? They're choosing the worst fucking music for driving around in a game. And the reason for this is, if you're doing classical music, you are going to be some stupid plebeian who has no fucking idea what to do with classical music. You're going to choose the worst performances, the worst recordings. You're going to choose shit. So you need to not be choosing stuff like well-known Bach sonatas and Chopin sonatas.
Yeah.
Don't choose good classical music that has to be performed well. Choose hilarious stuff like the Can-Can, right? Stuff like that is amusing and bombastic.
It's basically, yeah, go ahead.
They choose these complicated classical songs because they're the biggest classical songs. And they choose the worst fucking recordings of them that are just complete and utter bullshit. And they're worse than bad, bland classical music that is recorded and designed for these stupid, pretentious assholes that have no interest in classical music and just want to listen to this bullshit background music that is basically easy listening lift music and say, well, it's classical music, I'm the coolest fucking idiot in the room, right?
Right.
And they don't choose that because that is successful and good background music that you can just have on the background and basically ignore. But there's music there. They're the level below that where they're just these random shit recordings. And that's what they fucking get. And that's what's in this game. And oh my god, it is so crap. And just as bad as that is the music DJ. Maybe things are different in America, but the people DJing music stations are not self-hating, self-conscious music nerds They're pretentious, arrogant dickheads because they're fucking listening to classical music, the greatest form of music around. And what fucking music nerds that like classical music don't think they're the fucking best? All music nerds I knew that were involved in classical music were condescending dickheads who knew that they were listening to the greatest fucking music known to man. Who, might I add, when they got to being adults, moved into fucking shit pop music and released music that they would have vomited at when they were listening classical music. So, what the fuck is this bullshit?
I don't know. And what I want to know is this, right? Like, why does listening to classical music give anyone the impression that, oh, that's like an act of, like, some sort of intellectual pursuit, right? Like, you know how when you turn on classical radio, it's always like, you know, here we are, we're playing classical music, and, you know, we're great just because we're listening to classical music, right?
Yep.
And this is the thing, like, the ABC, the Australian Broadcasting Commission down here, they have these digital radio channels that are broadcast on the TV, right?
Yep.
So they have a classical, you know, digital radio station, right? Plays nothing but classical music. And I can see that because classical music is something that doesn't offend anyone, you know. I mean, they're basically using it, as you said, as like an easy listening kind of thing, right? Where does jazz come into this? Because now jazz has the same thing, right? And I mean, they have a jazz digital channel as well, and now that's become the thing, you know? Or has it always been the thing where, oh, because I listen to jazz, I am somewhat smarter or somewhat able to appreciate music better than you, or...
Jazz and classical, the reason is simple, okay? First of all, classical music is, technically speaking, vastly superior to any other form of music. And when I say classical music, I'm including all forms of classical music. So I'm somewhat misusing the term. So I'm including opera and all that sort of stuff. If you want to see the best vocal music, you are going to go for an opera. If you want to see the best writing in music, at least apart from in the lower classes where you might then go into rap, but just as a general rule, you're going to go into classical music for operas and all that sort of thing.
What about Broadway?
No.
Broadway writing?
No. I'm sorry, no. And the reason for that is simple. Broadway is, once again, pop music. And it's a completely different thing. And previously, it was the upper classes, but it was also much more intellectual, and so on and so forth. Here's what's happened.
What about Gilbert and Sullivan?
Happened. What? Sorry?
About Gilbert and Sullivan? Would you say
Gilbert and Sullivan? Yeah. So Gilbert and Sullivan is popular classical music.
It's pretty good writing.
Yep, it is. And Gilbert and Sullivan gets respect. Gilbert and Sullivan gets played on classical radio now and then as a bit of a joke.
Yeah.
But they don't play Broadway as a joke. But classical music has an expected degree of quality to it that is not there within other genres, except for when you get into something like hardcore rap. If you're in the culture of rap, you expect a certain degree of quality. And you don't in necessarily other forms of music, but presumably you do in some other forms. Jazz also. In jazz, you expect a certain degree of musicianship and all that sort of stuff, right?
Right.
You don't in other things. And here's what's happened, though. Since the advent of rock and roll and modern pop music, classical music has died. Since the 70s, there has been no mainstream classical music released, full stop. And the only innovations in classical music have been in the avant-garde. So classical music as a genre is dead. And the recordings of people recording old classical music has gone to shit. Classical music, as it is now, is completely and utterly dead. You have people like Philip Glass, who is a really good composer. He's not anywhere near the middling composers that were even there in the dying out stages of the 60s of classical music. Classical music is completely dead. That's why it's become this sort of put on the background, inoffensive bullshit. Because you look at classical music of the 50s and the 60s, and people are going to say, it was this just go-to, but people would say it was inoffensive then as well. That's not true at all. That was part of the propagandization that killed it. That rock and roll is the thing that offend people and stuff. There was a huge amount of classical music that offended not only the upper classes and the middle classes and so on and so forth.
I think you'll be a lot happier with the classical selection in Saints Row 4. I don't remember what it was like in Saints Row 3.
It's improved in Saints Row 3 because they've gone for the comedic route of stuff like the can-can, etc., which works perfectly in context. And,
no, I think they top that in Saints Row 4, and you will be very disappointed in the classical selection in Grand Theft Auto 5.
Yeah, well, the classical selection in previous Grand Theft Auto titles, in 3, I remember it in 3 as being very good. 3 had excellent
opera.
Yep, exactly. And it fitted the mafia story perfectly. That was the whole thing. They went for all this Italian classical music because it was a mafia story. And then after that, they just did this generic bullshit classical music in all their following titles, which was so disappointing. And the classical DJ in 3 as well was this condescending, arrogant prick, which was just a perfect parody of classical music DJs. And before we move on from this diversion that no one wanted to hear, I want to say Burnout Paradise is the worst use of classical music I have ever seen in anything, not just in video games. Are you familiar with it?
No, the only...
Okay, I listened to Aural over the fucking classical music on that game. That was just offensive. That made me want to fucking vomit. It was disgusting. And the selection was just so mind-bogglingly stupid. Oh my god. I actually wanted to bring up one last thing about radios in open world games. Going back to a comment you made a while ago on the podcast, and I can't remember when exactly it was, but you said that all interesting innovation, all good innovation in American culture was due to African Americans, to use your terminology, correct?
I can't believe I would have said that.
You did, and it just I was thinking this when I was playing Mafia 2, because during the beginning of the game, before the first jump aheading time, I was enjoying the radio so much. The pop music was excellent, really enjoyable. Then, after the first jump aheading time, the black influence started to infiltrate the very white American pop music, and it all went to shit. And I'm sorry, but to me, black music completely ruined pop music. And the reason for that is rock music should have grown out of, as it is predominantly a white musical culture, should have grown out of folk music and opera, as the pop music of the time was. It was growing out of both those styles of music. Then along came blues and fucked it all up for everyone, as did jazz.
I have nothing to say to this absurd theory of yours. That's ridiculous.
No, you are telling me that the driving force behind pop music is not black music since that point onwards.
I don't think jazz can hold any responsibility for pop music. And anyway, the pop music when jazz came around wasn't that great, man. It's, it's like, yes, sir, that's my baby. Oh, sir, me maybe, and all that shit. I mean, who wants...
That's hilarious.
Who wants to keep that?
That's hilarious. I will take that. I will take that over the Beatles and pop music of that vein.
Okay, fine. Me too. Who threw the Beatles in here? Keep them out of it. Now, when the Beatles came around, though, you got to remember that pop music was basically, how much is that doggy in the window, right? So, I mean, that is what that was like top 10, right? So when the Beatles came around, and then the Monkees and the Beach Boys and all the rest of it, at least they changed pop music, because they'd gone away from rock and roll and gone back to this stuff, Pat Boone bullshit. So again, I don't.
This is what I'm saying. Wait a minute.
Yes,
That's what I'm saying.
What are you
right.
saying?
Well, yeah, you're right there. That what they did was they basically went back to the white culture, but they still had so much of the black music there. What I'm getting at is the issue is what's happened now with modern pop music, from basically the Beatles onwards to now, is you've got this absolutely crap combination of the two. And you only get interesting and good music when it's one or the other because of how shitty the two have combined. And I don't know why that is. Maybe it's due to Americans still being so segregated that you can't get a good relationship between the two. But whenever you combine the two, the result is shit. When you've got someone that is completely appropriating, like when you've got Elvis Presley completely copying the blues, you get something that's awesome. When you get Eminem completely copying rap, you get something that's awesome. When you get someone trying to do some wishy-washy, shitty version of the two-in-one, you get complete crap, is what I was trying to say.
I think authentic voices will always, be valued over that which is overproduced. And I think that the music industry is obviously clearly overproduced.
Yep.
Elvis was an authentic voice. Eminem was an authentic voice. But, but yeah, you're right. Anything else that's pretending to be whatever they're pretending to be is not going to be great, regardless of the genre, regardless of the influences. Now, what about the 80s, though? I mean, because that was probably a higher level of pop, right? But with the lessening of rock and roll, with the new wave and the rise of the avant-garde, I think there was something there. I don't know why we moved away from that, but there did seem
electronic instruments.
Yeah,
is the answer to that, and automated drum machines.
Was it just that, hey, we have the flexibility now, we have greater freedom, we can make some of this music ourselves without having a band, sort of thing, or? I
think it was not just that, but because you're working with automated percussion and automated percussion, given that pop music derives all its rhythm from the one repeated bar, basically, of percussion, if you're then doing that through an automated means, it then completely alters the entire feeling of the music, because everything else is copying that automated single repetition. Whereas if you are playing that live, even if you're playing exactly the same thing, you end up with something that feels completely different. And so, given that you notice, as these people, musicians, are trying to create something, they're going to notice there's a different feel here, so they're going to alter everything else they're doing to suit that new style, which is why I think we got a completely different sound from the 80s onwards.
Well, okay. Well,
You disagree?
No, I agree with that. I disagree. I think that some of your other points have been inarticulately stated and could possibly be confused for something that you're not saying.
I think we come to the right conclusion at the end there.
I'm going to say yes so that we can move on. But, okay. If you want to
you just don't want to be heard again as saying you said black influence was responsible for everything good in American culture.
Well, I think that can be said. Now that I think about it, it sounded ridiculous 20 minutes ago, but now I'm starting to think about it. I'm thinking about Martin Luther King, Miles Davis, Jackie Robinson, and on and on and on. I think, well, obviously the United States of America is a better place for the influence of African Americans, and that is undeniable. Now, to say something as ludicrous and outlandish as all good things have been made better by African Americans, that's obviously a ludicrous and hyperbolic statement.
Is this not in itself somewhat absurd, given that American culture, or rather black American culture, where's its relevance as a thing beyond it being part of American culture? Because though everyone goes to great lengths to try and link African culture with black American culture, the two are generally completely unrelated.
Yeah, it's a separate culture at this point, obviously, yes.
Yeah.
So, Saints Row 2.
Indeed. And last week, or technically 2 weeks ago, I was complaining about the complete stupidity of forcing you to do activities in between missions, simply so that you can unlock the required rank to do the mission, right?
Yep.
Now, this becomes less of a problem later in the game if and only if you have raised your style rank up enough. Because if you raise your style rank up enough, you then get bonuses so that you get one of the rankings called for the missions more easily. And because you're killing so many gang members and many of the missions that give you a ranking, I think after a certain point in the game, I only had to do activities again maybe once or twice, which wasn't so bad. But it's just so stupid. And the fact that it is so bad at the beginning of the game starts you off on completely the wrong foot. And at the beginning of the game, you should be being eased into the missions, right? Rather than having to do this bullshit to actually get into them. So even though it does lessen towards the end of the game, it is still just completely unacceptable and ruins the flow of the game. And when it does pop up later in the missions, given that you might be at an exciting point in the story and you just want to see what happens, even though it's rare, it then grates even more because you're then suddenly, I've got to do this shit again before I do the mission, right?
Well, yeah, I think it's a good example of ludonarrative dissonance, really.
Exactly. And to form an analogy, a perfect video game analogy, to complement the use of ludonarrative dissonance, what it is like is eating a fine gourmet meal, and in between each serving of caviar, you are force-fed a Big Mac. And although the Big Mac itself might be a fine Big Mac, you don't want to be being force-fed a Big Mac in between each serving of raw fish eggs.
Exactly.
Yeah, I don't think I could have said that better myself.
No.
And
it's
the missions are broken.
Dickens himself couldn't have done better.
Exactly. In 200 years' time, people will be going back to that.
To this podcast.
Exactly. I think probably due to the, I would say, accurate depiction of pop music, despite what some naysayers might claim. But I digress. The missions themselves are broken up into 3 different sets of gangs, I think. It's 3. And basically, each mission set is its own self-composed story. And there's not really an overall story. There kind of is, which involves some guy in the background involved in the corporation that basically runs the city. But the main focus of the story and all the character development is contained within these 3 gang missions. And it does it in a very interesting way, because each gang has its own villain, of course, but more importantly, each set of missions focuses on one of the side characters. So the Ronin, for example, is all about the main character's relationship with Gat, and the Sons of Semendi, or whatever the hell they're called, Sons of Semdi, however it's pronounced, focuses on his relationship with Shaundy, and the Brotherhood focuses on his or her relationship with Pierce, which I think is an excellent way to do the character development. Because it is a comedy, the characters are an important part of the story, and their relationships with one another form a large part of the humour. So it's excellent that you get to focus on each one, rather than them coming along and doing random cameos within what might be an overall story. And each set of missions as well also has its own feel to it. The Brotherhood is basically focuses on gimmicky sort of open world style missions where you're doing lots of stupid over the top stuff, which is often kind of boring. There's a lot of missions in the Brotherhood where you're just sort of doing these on the rails shooting sections, or you might be just driving around in where the only justification for driving around is some stupid story gimmick. The Ronin missions are the more sort of set-piecey missions. The SMD ones are the more third-person shooter, traditional focus missions. So they've all got their own feel to them, so that there's a nice variety of missions. And they've got their own pacing to them, so that even if you don't want to switch between the missions so that you're just doing whatever the hell at the time, if you want to play through them from beginning to end, if it wasn't for the activities, they would have a really nice flow to them.
Yeah.
as you go through them.
They were really good, and I really liked the different gangs and the leaders. I thought they were credible. While they were stereotypes, they were also somehow credible, which I guess really sums up all of the characterizations in Saints Row.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things that surprised me, because the characters are all extreme, over-the-top parodies of certain things, pretty much anything that... actually, no, certain parodies of certain stereotypes. They're pretty consistent in that, but that doesn't mean that you can't make a believable and enjoyable character just because they're ridiculously over the top, which a lot of parodies go wrong in because they think, well, it's a parody, so we're not even going to attempt to make them an enjoyable character because it's still going to be funny because they're a parody, right? But just because something is completely over the top in a parody doesn't mean that they still can't be enjoyable characters, and there's real camaraderie between all the characters that is really enjoyable.
They've done a really good job of that. I mean,
absolutely,
particularly with Shandy and Gat. I'd say probably Shandy is the most realistic character that they have, while still being a complete, stereotype.
And I think the only reason Pierce isn't as solid is simply because he's in the game less. He's basically the Brotherhood, as I said, is the main focus for him, but Shandy pops up in that almost as much as him, if not as much, despite her being the main focus of the Sons of Semdi, which Pierce pops up in a bit as well, but not as much as Shandy pops up there. So I think the only reason he seems lesser than the other two is simply because he's in the game less. And I think the dynamic between him, Shandy, and the main character is excellent because, and maybe do the characters change different depending on what voice actor you choose, or is the script exactly the same?
The script is, in 2, I think the script is exactly the same.
Okay, because when I was playing, it was basically, though you're the guy that gets everything done, Gat is basically the guy that the main character looks up to, and they're the two main friends and dude bros, and everyone else is below them, and Shandy and Pierce are constantly trying to get the approval of the main character because Gat, being higher up, doesn't give a shit about them. And so there's an interesting dynamic between those three, because throughout the Sons of Semdi and the Brotherhood, they're both constantly trying to get the approval and prove themselves worthy to the main character, who doesn't really care about them, which is an interesting dynamic, and yet at the same time, he's still protective of them, and there's still an affectionate dynamic to it, and so a lot of his dismissal of them is in a very fatherly sort of manner.
Yeah, I think also that it also helps the game too, because it builds into the power fantasy thing of having these characters try and get your respect.
Yeah.
So.
Yep, exactly. So the story itself, I actually thought that some of the gang stuff, the plots were actually quite enjoyable, and there was a lot of dark humor in it, which I was not expecting given the visual style of the game, which was nice. I mean, people go on about Grand Theft Auto sometimes having some dark moments in the story, which isn't really true, honestly. And here you've got some stuff involving the Brotherhood, which was pretty dark as far as games are concerned. It's certainly not dark as far as dark humor in other mediums is concerned, but as far as games is concerned, it was certainly respectable as dark humor. Now, the only problem with the missions is, as I probably alluded to earlier, is they could have done with a fair bit of trimming. And there's only 10 missions per each gang, so I suppose that is why there wasn't more trimming, as maybe that would seem like not that much in open world terms, but you often get things repeated, especially with stuff like shooting things in a helicopter, which you do several times without there being much difference between each instance. I think they could have done with cutting maybe 50% of the on-rails shooting sections, which I thought would it really felt like filler at times, and they weren't there to punctuate the pacing as downtime, except in maybe the Ronin section, maybe the Ronin set of missions for some of the driving sections, but generally they really felt like filler, much as being forced to do the activities did. So I think the game really could have benefited from having a lot of padding removed from it.
Yeah, as you said, even if they'd just this game would have been great, even if you had just played like all of the Ronin missions back to back to back.
Yeah.
It would have held up, which is kind of one of the things that's come up with Grand Theft Auto 5 and where do they go from here. I think for the next 2 games, they can do exactly just replicate what they've done with Grand Theft Auto 5. But then there's other people saying, well, is it time for it just to get rid of the open world stuff? Because the open world stuff is so ancillary in this game, like the golf and the tennis, and it's kind of like, and darts, and it's kind of like it's walking dogs and working out. So kind of at a point where it's like, do I really need that in a game, or would I prefer a more directed experience?
Would you rather be able to play golf or have every heist mission a proper one?
Yeah, exactly. Right. And I don't need karaoke. I don't need to be doing yoga. I don't need to be going to the therapist. I just would have preferred to, have them focus on the key things. Now, obviously with Saints Row 2, it was unnecessarily padded. I mean, I don't think it was an abuse of the open world system at all, but I do think it was padded for the wrong reasons. And it did affect the pacing of, not necessarily the story, but most certainly your enjoyment of the game.
Yeah, and with GTA, the other thing about open worlds that I think Saints Row from 2 onwards, going by what I played of 3, has shown should be done is why not, instead of having all this ancillary stuff and a 20-hour campaign, why not condense the campaign so there's less padding in the campaign? Make the campaign 10 hours or 12 hours instead of 20, and have all this random shit on the side as well, but not have the campaign 20 hours as well as all this random stuff.
Yeah. Or in the case of Grand Theft Auto, don't have the main campaign be 40 hours, and then give me another...
and have it 20.
And then have 40 hours of the other stuff. I'd much prefer if they just gave you the game up front, and then at the end of it said, okay, and now it's an open world game. Go do what you want. And maybe with a better realization of online implementation, that would actually work. Because instead of just having this open world in which there's no longer a story reason to hang out in, if you did it properly, it would be an open world populated with real people, which would actually be pretty fun and entertaining. And I'm not talking about 15 people like they're doing with Grand Theft Auto 5. I'm talking about mass
1,500
multiplayer. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think we should see this happen. I mean, the only reason that I can come up with that they have paced the stories in open world games the way that they have is so that it's easier for people to move from story missions to doing the random side stuff. But if they actually look at how people generally play open world games, either they're not going to give a shit about the story anyway, so they're just going to do whatever they feel like at the time, or how many people just play the story first from beginning to end before they do the side stuff, as if it is a normal game. A lot do. Yeah. So it seems an unnecessary concession for people that probably don't play like that anyway.
There's 2 different audiences. I mean, you've got the Madden crowd, and I've had plenty of associates like this in the past where they're like, oh, new Grand Theft Auto's out, and they get in, they try to get a 5-star rating, like for about 9 weeks in a row, where all it's about is getting star ratings and don't even touch the main missions. And then there's people like me who just like, I just want to play the campaign and be done, and then never play it again. So,
absolutely. And we do have to go back before we end to the just complete shitness of the port. I said 2 weeks ago that you couldn't change the controls, right?
Yeah.
Guess what? You can, but they've made it even stupider than you not being able to change the controls, because once you get to the alter controller button screen, guess what you find?
What?
You find a list of keyboard keys in place of controller buttons. And you might say, of course, it's got the button 1, but it's got a picture of the key. You might say, of course, well, on PC, you can use a variety of controls. So lots of games say button 1 and all that sort of thing. That would be valid if the game was compatible with more than the Xbox 360 controller.
Ouch.
Yep. So they took the lack of a feature to including a feature that was worse than not having it, which is quite an achievement, I would say.
I really want to know who localized this or ported it.
Yeah, and the glitches, the technical issues as I went on, and the game got more ridiculous, didn't get worse. Just once again to demonstrate that this is an issue with the porting. It's just, at times though, I could just be walking down the street and the game could virtually freeze. It was just, the more I played and the more crazy it got, the more during the random low points did random shit happen that was just so incredibly bad because I'd played the game for longer and been exposed to more. And the final thing I want to go back to is the mechanics, which we'll get into in more detail on Saints Row the Third, but after playing this for like 20 hours, these are genuinely, and people are probably going to laugh at this, but these are some of the best third-person shooter mechanics I have played. And the reason for that is, they might be incredibly simple, but they do that to absolute perfection. I can jump out of a car and be immediately involved in a humongous firefight against like 20 people that can all do reasonable amounts of damage to me, and I have to play well against, at the drop of a hat, and I can go from weapon to weapon with no problems. It is something simple done, but it is done so incredibly well. And it's not just done well so that it works perfectly with no issues, but it is fun to use as well. It's the same thing as in Vanquish, where you've got these mechanics that are just work so perfectly that they then become fun to use because they are so well done. And though, of course, Vanquish does this in a completely different way and does it better than this, this is like close to being as good as Vanquish, which is probably going to just completely destroy my credibility when it comes to analyzing mechanics. But I just think the third-person shooting mechanics are so incredibly good.
I think so too, and a lot of it has to do with the way that the camera sweeps around behind you, and you control the camera.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. The camera control is so perfect as well.
Yeah, yeah.
I never had to struggle with the camera. I was always in complete control about it, and so good was it that unless I was having to deal with a section where the game was running at some ridiculous frame rate, when I tried to use the mouse on and off, I was almost as good with the controller. I only needed to go to the mouse if I was having trouble when the frame rate was fucked up.
Right.
So that's how good it is. And the driving as well. When I started, it was fun driving, but I thought it was, pretty much without any depth or being any interesting at all. But for the few moments that I got to use a fast car, bearing in mind, the faster I got, the worse the prefetching was.
Yeah.
So generally I avoided fast cars. When I was actually in fast cars, they actually felt completely different. Not only just compared to the slower cars, but different sports cars felt different to one another. It's just that the crap cars in the game all felt pretty generic to one another. But when you're in the good cars, there's actually a nice range to the mechanics and the feels of how they drive.
Well, yeah, and I mean, they carried over the mechanics and the driving over into Saints Row 3, so now that you're playing a non-broken version of the game, you're actually probably getting a better sense of what Saints Row 2 was actually like, besides the PC port.
I'm not sure they did carry over the mechanics, but we will get to that in more detail later, and I think we can now finally get to the score, I believe.
Okay, do we have any listener predictions?
Yes, and I have no idea what they want to be called now, because their site was meant to come up this month. I'm not sure if it has, I haven't checked, but we've got Harbhajan Singh's prediction from either Endless Backlog or Goofy Yourself, depending on what the site is currently known as, who said I will give the game 6. What's your prediction?
Well, are you rating the PC port or the game?
The PC port.
Okay, so you're playing the game as... you're rating the game as played.
Correct.
So, given that you said that the mechanics were the best third-person that you'd ever experienced, given that...
No, one of the best.
Given that you love the music, with one exception, given that you think that the characters are able to be portrayed in a stereotypical way, yet still be realistic, and that
they're Dickensian,
and that you're involved with the stories, and that you liked the main missions. And then on the bad side, you said that it's padded, and also the PC port is absolutely completely broken. So these are tough things for me to balance. The first ones sound like an 8, the other ones sound like a 3. So I'm going to guess that you're going to give this game a 4.5.
Okay, and I can reveal, I said Harbour Singh's prediction, right?
6.5, I believe.
A 6.
6. Okay.
Okay, excellent. So I can now reveal my score is 3.5 out of 10.
All right.
And to Harbour Singh's defense, if there had not been the port, if I just ran this as the game, I would probably be giving it about a 6.5 out of 10.
Yeah. And I think I'd probably give it an 8.7 out of 10.
So that's pretty much the same score I'm giving it then.
Yeah, or a 9 out of 12.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're in the same sort of territory.
Yeah, I'd give it a 9 out of 12.
Okay.